So today we're going to do something a little bit different. On Monday, we are getting what is presumably going to be a major ban list update focused on Modern. And AspiringSpike, one of the people in the entire world whose opinion I respect most about Modern. If you don't know AspiringSpike, I think he's the biggest or one of the biggest Modern streamers at this point. Also has a YouTube channel where he posts videos like this. But the thing I love about Spike, he plays a ton of Modern, but he's not, despite his AspiringSpike name, just a purely Spike player. He's not someone who's just gonna like rip the top deck that everyone else is playing and grind that to try to qualify for stuff. He's a brewer and he's trying to innovate and do new things. So when you add all this together, Spike's opinion about Modern is one of the opinions that I respect most out of anyone in the Magic community. So he posted this video called Modern Problems, Modern Solutions. And what I want to do today is watch this video and kind of break down my thoughts, because Modern has been my favorite format for like a decade now. But over the last year, really, since Modern Horizons 3, I found myself falling out of love with my favorite format to the point where I can barely bring myself to play Modern at all at the moment. So I want to see what Spike's take is on this format, what he thinks we should do. So let's jump into this video and see what happens. Before we do, a super quick reminder. If you need any of the cards we talk about today, you can snag up from our sponsor Card Kingdom over at cardkingdom.com/MTGGoldfish.
Modern has always been a format that's had a lot of problems. In fact, I kind of think that that's been one of the selling points, at least to me, is that Modern is a format where players can come to feel very hot and cold. There are decks that players really, really love, certain cards, certain playstyles, certain matchups that are just so unique from everything else when it comes to Magic the Gathering and games in general. And then there's also decks that you just kind of love to hate. Crazy big mana decks, weird combos, way too efficient interactive cards. Like, you could really feel all of the extremes of what it's like to be very enfranchised and enchanted by a game.
I think this is definitely true about Modern, although I will say, I think over the last like 3 or 4 years, the balance has kind of shifted. The format has narrowed as we've ended up in this place where a huge amount of the playable cards in the format are from Modern Horizons in specific, and like the last 3 or 4 years of Magic in general. So I think the format's narrowed a lot, where we've ended up in a world where there's a lot more of the decks that people hate you're running into all the time, and a lot less of the wacky combos that you didn't see coming, because it's just getting so much harder to actually brew those style of decks in a world where we have all this Modern Horizons fueled power creep. So I think it's true, but it's also kind of getting less true.
But lately, and really since the release of Modern Horizons 3, it's been a lot more lukewarm, unfortunately.
No, okay, I guess. I mean, for me, it's more back to like Modern Horizons 2, but it sounds like Spike might be feeling kind of the same thing about Modern.
For the last 6 months that Modern Horizons 3 has been legal, the format has been dominated by unbalanced cards from that set.
I mean, yes, that's true, but wasn't that true of Modern Horizons 2 and to a lesser extent Modern Horizons 1? Like, I agree with this, but I'm not sure it's a new problem. I feel like maybe it's worse than ever with Modern Horizons 3, which is sad because I was thinking Wizards was going to like learn from Modern Horizons 2 and Modern Horizons 3 would maybe go a different direction. Instead, it seems like kind of doubling down on the worst parts of Modern Horizons 2. But I think this has been going on at least since Modern Horizons 2 and arguably all the way back to Modern Horizons 1, rather than just a Modern Horizons 3 specific problem. Although I do think it got worse with Modern Horizons 3.
We had a very unpleasant Nadu summer. The card and the deck built around it dominated the Pro Tour, was the most competitive deck in the format for a long period of time, and Wizards took way too long to ban the damn thing.
I mean, yes, they did. Although they always do this, right? Wizards has a track record of taking way too long to ban the damn thing. If you think about it, they banned Nadu in almost the exact same amount of time as Hogak. So again, it's not like Wizards is learning from the past mistakes here, or at least if they are learning from it, we aren't seeing the fruits of them learning from it because they're still banning things wrong. If you think about Pioneer, Pioneer might be the best example of this, where Pioneer, Wizards let it wither on the vine when it was growing and improving by letting a bunch of combo decks remain unchecked at the top of the meta for like a year, back during the like Inverter of Truth Heliod combo. What was it? There were 3 combo decks. Was it Lotus Field? I don't know. Dimir Inverter, maybe maybe Lotus Field and Heliod combo, but there were 3 big combo decks that essentially dominated the meta. Wizards let it go for like a year. The format got much less popular because of that. Eventually, they did do the right thing and ban things, and Pioneer started to get better. And then they did the same thing again with like Amalia combo. They did it with Hogak in Modern. They did it with Fury in Modern, and with Grief in Modern. They did it with the Runway right now, arguably. So all this to say, they have a long track record of taking way too long to ban things. So yes, they took too long to ban Nadu, but that's a symptom of a systemic issue at Wizards, in my opinion, rather than, oh, we made a mistake with Nadu and waited too long. This happens almost every time something needs to be banned.
Those months leading up to the Nadu ban were a very difficult time to be a Modern player. Modern Horizons 3 was, I think, the most anticipated, hyped up set of all time. I think you could make a very good argument that was the case.
At least
we had a lot
sets.
of players who did play Modern already every day who were super excited. That was me. We had a lot of players trying the format for the first time. We had a lot of players coming back for the first time in a long time. It was really exciting. But when it was clear that Nadu was just dominating the formats much better than everything else, completely unbalanced, there was like a big sense of like anxiousness from these players who wanted to play with the new cards and wanted to play the format, but the format was just kind of unplayable. And
I think that's the thing that Wizards, I don't know if they don't realize or don't care, but I feel like letting things like Nadu go unchecked for so long, it diminishes the hype for the entire set. Like, this past summer, June, July, August, should have been peak Modern Horizons, peak Modern time. If you go back on our YouTube channel, go back on the MTGGoldfish channel, look at the videos around when Modern Horizon 1 released, Modern Horizons 2 released. Through the roof. Everyone was so hyped to see the new cards from that set. However, this time around, it was different because essentially immediately upon release, Nadu was tier 0, and then honestly, Burrow's Energy was like a solid second place. So it really just killed the enthusiasm for the format. The decks were so powerful and Nadu so miserable that it didn't feel like there was any point in trying to brew decks around the lesser cards from the set, which is my favorite part of Modern Horizons. Like, Modern Horizons at this point, I'm willing to write it off as a mistake. I've been someone who's defended Modern Horizons up through Modern Horizons 2 because I really like the Soul Herder editions, the Sevulin editions, these cards that created new like tier 2, tier 3 decks, or propped up like Sevulin, Merfolk, a deck that had pretty much fallen off altogether. It made it into like a tier 2 deck again where you could kind of play Merfolk. I thought that those positives outweighed the negatives of the Hogaks of the world, of the Furies of the world, of the Griefs of the world. But now that we've done this 3 times, I wish Modern Horizons did not exist. I think it is actually the biggest negative in the history of Modern, and the thing most likely to actually straight up kill the Modern format. So I've changed my tune on this one. Now I just wish Modern Horizons was not even a thing. It ended up being just such a huge negative, even though I really liked the idea of it at first because of those fun like lower tier cards. But in the end, it turns out that everyone just plays the handful of most busted cards, and those cards are so busted it ends up pushing out the lower tier cards and disincentivizing you to brew with all the cool cards from the set because they're just not as good as the super pushed, top tier cards from the set.
And we had to wait months for the scheduled BNR announcement to get to play with the dang cards. And when that announcement came out, I made a longer video talking about how these scheduled BNRs are really bad for the health of the format. I'm going to link that video down below. I think there's a lot relevant there that I'm not going to get to today that is still relevant today. But I did want to play a clip from that video, which I feel is super important for today's discussion.
I will say, before we watch this clip, I feel like scheduled ban announcements are bad for Magic, or bad for Modern in specifically. They might be a positive for Standard. I see why Wizards is trying to do that. The thing I dislike about Wizards, one of the things, is their lack of flexibility, right? Like, there's no reason, if you think that Standard needs to have a very rigid ban setup where you only get bans once a year and emergency bans every set or whatever, if you think that's best for Standard because you think that the most important thing in Standard is people to have faith that their cards are going to remain legal and feel safe buying those cards, That's fine. I don't necessarily agree with that, so I don't know if it's correct, but I can see where Wizards coming from on that. But there's no reason you have to treat Modern the same way. Like, you don't have to have Standard and Modern get bans on the same schedule. You can have Standard, have a very rigid set schedule, and have bannings in Modern is necessary, because guess what? The two formats are different, so you treat them differently. So you don't have to treat every format the same. We saw a little bit of this with the London Mulligan rule, right? There was calls at the time to implement the London Mulligan rule only for like Standard and Limited, but leave Eternal formats alone, where there was a risk that we would see combo decks become too strong with the new Mulligan rule. And Wizards just kind of quashed that right away. And they're like, no, we need to have the same Mulligan rule for every single format. And I think that's Wizards' track record. I guess it probably makes it easier for them, but the downside is the lack of flexibility ends up hurting various formats because they're so different from each other. And that's what makes Magic so great, right? We have Standard on one end, we have Vintage on the other end, you have Commander way up here. There's all these different ways to play the game, and Wizards should treat those like separate formats and be able to ban for them as necessary and not treat them all exactly the same.
And that pressure comes from the fact that if Wizards doesn't perfectly fix a format with a scheduled BNR announcement, the next chance they have to fix it is months and months away. I think the next scheduled BNR, they've said, is now in December, and that means that if the One
This
Ring
announcement was
or
August
Ruby Storm
27th.
or Ugin's Labyrinth decks or whatever ends up being super duper prominent, dominant, and Modern, and things are unfun, then we have months before Wizards is going to do anything about it.
Worth pointing out, that announcement came August 27th. The ban list that's coming up December 16th. So we have September, October, November, most of December, 3.5 months essentially, closer to 4 months even, between ban list announcements. And we talked about this at the time. If you go back to August when they banned Nadu, I was very concerned that exactly what ended up happening would happen, that you would ban Nadu, because if you looked at the win rates of decks in August, and I wish I could find this data now, but apparently the sites that like track win rates, they've updated, so it doesn't have August anymore, so I couldn't actually find the data. But if you go back to that time in August and look at the data, Nadu was winning like 56, 57% of the time, but Energy was winning like 55, 56%. It was like very close. It was a percent or two behind Nadu, and there was a very big concern that I had that sure, you get rid of Nadu, but then Energy would just be the next Nadu, the next tier 0 deck, doubly so with the One Ring that was in like 50% of decks, and now it's up to 60% of decks. So the fact that Wizards did what they had to do eventually in banning Nadu, not nearly as quickly as they should have, but they didn't do anything else. With this rigid structure for ban list updates, it left us in a very bad, it left us where we are now, in a position where Modern is arguably just as bad, or maybe worse than during the Nadu stages, but with Boros Energy in the One Ring replacing Nadu at the top of the format. So this lack of flexibility is straight up killing Modern. Like, what we need Wizards to be able to do is be like, okay, we're gonna ban Nadu because we know we gotta ban Nadu. They should have done it quicker, but they should have just banned Nadu and been like, all right, you know what? We're gonna see what happens with this Energy deck. We're gonna see what happens with the One Ring. Now that Nadu's out of the way, we got rid of the monster of the format. Now we're gonna see what happens. And if it looks like Energy is going to be dominant a month from now, or 2 weeks from now, or 3 weeks from now, whatever, like in the near future, we're gonna ban Energy. Like, that's what you need to be able to do. You don't need 3.5 months to tell if Energy and the One Ring are going to be too good. We knew that 2 weeks after Nadu was banned. Honestly, I think if you looked at the data and had half a brain, you knew this was a very realistic possibility before Nadu was banned. But Wizards' stubbornness to stick to this schedule ended up leading to another dead period of Modern, and it feels like Modern's just bouncing between these periods, right? Like, the same cycle, ever since Modern Horizons 2 at least, the same cycle has been repeating itself, where you have the Rakdos scam decks come up, dominate the format, eventually, way too late, they finally ban that, and then you have Nadu rise up and take over the format, and then way too late they ban Nadu, and then Boros Energy becomes the new Nadu and takes over the format, and now probably they're gonna have to ban Boros Energy. It's not a sustainable cycle. Like, eventually people are going to get sick of that, and I finally reach my breaking point. You've heard us talk about this on the Goldfish podcast, where Krim is like, I was done with Modern back in Modern Horizons 1. Like, I was just done right away. It took me until Modern Horizons 3 to get to that point, but I'm just sick of that cycle and it's not fun anymore. And one way Wizards could fix that is by being able to deal with problems quicker. And the way to deal with problems quicker is being able to ban off schedule whenever a format needs it, not just whenever you set a date 3 or 4 months in the future.
And here we are, 3 months later. The format has been pretty bad this entire time. It's kind of just evolved into a Boros synergy versus combo metagame. It's been like this for a while, and we have had to wait months for anything to happen. So it's time to get into the weeds a little bit, talk about what is the modern metagame like, what are the problems, and what are the solutions. And of course, I really, really want Modern to get back on track. I want it to be fun and exciting again. It is still my favorite format to play. I love to dive in deep. I love to get really weird with it. There's just nothing like it. It's such a unique and special format to me, and I have high hopes that we can fix the damn thing.
I also want Modern to get better and be fixed more than just about everything. Modern has been, during my Magic career, my favorite format, not even close. I do not have nearly as much faith that realistically the thing's going to get fixed. Like, I think the issues are so big and the cat's so far out of the bag at this point. I am very, very concerned that the process is going to keep repeating itself unless there are some structural changes. I don't think you can just ban your way out of this, barring something absurd that's never going to happen, like we ban all of Modern Horizons cards. Like, that's not happening. It's a non-starter. There's no way Wizards is going to do that. But barring something extreme like that I think is not going to happen, I don't think you can just ban your way out of this, because that same process we were just talking about of scam into Nadu, into energy, is going to just keep happening. Like, if they go into this BNR and they kill the One Ring and they kill Mardu energy, it might be Dimir Murktide with Psychic Frog. It seems like that might be the deck. That's the tier 0 deck. That's 30% of the meta. And then we spend the next 3 or 4 months not wanting to play Modern because it's all just Psychic Frog and we're doing the same thing again. And then eventually they ban that, and then the next thing comes up. And by that point, they print a Lord of the Rings set, they print Modern Horizons 4, and the whole thing starts over again with a pseudo rotation. So I would love to see that happen more than anything, but my faith is not nearly as high as it sounds like Spikes is.
But before I get into the specifics of what I'd like to see banned, what I might like to see unbanned, I want y'all to hear this. I think the most important thing that Wizards of the Coast can do during the December 16th scheduled BNR announcement is to get rid of scheduled BNR announcements.
Okay. I don't know if it's the most important thing. I think the most important thing is you gotta ban some cards, or Modern just like literally dies. Like, you gotta ban the One Ring, you gotta ban some Boros energy stuff. But I do agree that long-term, for the long-term health of Modern, that would be the best thing. There is a problem here, though. Let's say Wizards does that. Let's say part of this announcement is we're getting rid of this ban list schedule and we're going to ban cards as necessary. There's still another step to that, which is Wizards needs to actually do it. Like, we have had time periods in Magic where the ban list was updated whenever we need it to be updated, right? This set schedule is a relatively new thing that started last year, where it was super strict. We went through times when Wizards would just ban stuff as necessary, and Wizards still took way too long to ban things. So just saying we're getting rid of scheduled ban list announcements doesn't actually fix the problem. You actually have to be willing to take advantage of this power. And what I think is you need a Gavin when it comes down to it. Like, I always come back to the Pauper committee and Gavin running Pauper. Pauper's in a good place. It is also getting a ton of cards added to it because of all these new sets that drop the rarity on things. But Pauper's been in a really good stable place from every Pauper player I talk to. And I put a lot of that on the active management from Gavin and the Pauper committee. We need a Gavin in Modern. We need someone who is actually going to stand up for that format and is going to be willing to actually ban Nadu after 2 weeks, not 3 months. So yes, it would be great if Wizards says we're getting rid of the scheduled ban list announcements, but unless they're actually willing to do that, it's not actually going to do anything.
To just simply fix formats when they need to be fixed and leave them alone when they can be left alone. I understand that there are positives to the scheduled announcements, but in my opinion, Modern is just too volatile a format to have these scheduled announcements and keep an active and excited player base.
The other way you could do it is keep scheduled announcements, but have that schedule be monthly or something. The first Monday of every month, whatever you want to, like, however you want to structure it, but have them be much more frequent, which Wizards probably still doesn't want to do that, because it seems like Wizards' take is they want stability and they fear changing too much, which is kind of ironic because then they release a Modern Horizons set, which changes the format a huge amount. But when it comes to bannings, they really value that stability for better or worse.
Because things were relatively stable in the Modern format from like Strixhaven to Outlaws of Thunder Junction, with a few exceptions like Of the Beanstalk and Grief/Fury Scam.
Beanstalk, One Ring, Bowmasters, Scam. I mean, maybe it's more stable than it has been, but I don't know about stable.
I think people kind of have forgotten that a big part of this format's history is just a new broken card being released like literally every set. I think from like War of the Spark to Call Time, there was either a card that got another card banned, a card that got a rule changed, or a card that outright got banned itself.
True. Although, for the first almost 10 years of Modern, it wasn't so much like this. I think that's, like, it's the recent history of Modern for sure, but I really think that has to do with the Fire Design era, where Wizards wanted to really push to print these exciting cards, and the end result was they printed a lot of cards and mechanics that ended up breaking things, Uros and Okos and Companions, and this push to like have exciting replayability, whatever the FIRE acronym stands for. So yes, it is the recent history of Modern, but I think when you talk about the Modern a lot of people pine for, which is like the 2015, 2016, 2017, back when, you know, Splinter Twin and Jund and Birthing Pod, which I'm sure is some rose-colored glasses, hindsight bias stuff going on there, some nostalgia going on, but I don't think we had that level of upheaval on a frequent basis like we have seen from War of the Spark forward. And to back that up, War of the Spark did that to basically every format, right? If you look at that same time period, the same thing was happening in Legacy and in Standard. We were getting an unprecedented amount of bannings in Pioneer, so Commander even. So we're seeing this through all the formats. So I think that's more of a Fire era design problem than a Modern problem.
And bans are bad. It stinks when stuff gets broken in Modern, but Modern is also an incredibly deep and complex and weird format. And unfortunately, stuff is just going to break sometimes. Which again is why I think you just need to have a more proactive approach to the ban list. But I'll try not to harp on that point too much as we dive into the specifics.
I mean, yeah, like, things are going to break as you print powerful cards. We've talked about it a lot of times. We want Wizards to print powerful, exciting cards. But if you're going to take risks in printing powerful, exciting cards, you also need to be quick with the ban hammer when things go wrong, which is where Wizards has been failing, in my opinion. Yes, like, some of the card designs do, like, Nadu was not a risk that was worth taking. Like, some of the card designs have just been silly, and Wizards should have known better. But in general, if you print Nadu and it dominates and you ban it in 2 weeks, I can deal with that. What I can't deal with is print Nadu, have it dominate for 2 or 3 months, and then ban it, and then be like, well, we're going to wait 3.5 months for the next ban list update. Why Borrow's Energy dominates.
So let's talk about the elephant in the room. The One Ring is problematic in Modern.
The One Ring has got to go. If the One Ring does not get banned on Monday, I am going to start believing the conspiracy theory that there's something in the contract with the Tolkien estate that keeps Wizards from banning cards from the set. Because we have not seen, I don't believe, any cards from One Ring, the One Ring, from Lord of the Rings get banned. So I'm going to start believing that conspiracy theory if the One Ring does not get banned. If this is another announcement like the last 5 or whatever, saying, well, we're keeping an eye on the One Ring. We know it sees a play in a lot of decks, but, you know, there's not one specific One Ring deck that's dominating. So even though it's 61% of the meta, we're just going to let it go. If we get that announcement again for the 5th time in a row, then I'm actually going to start to believe that there is actually just something keeping Wizards from banning the One Ring, because it is one of the most obvious bans at this point that I've ever seen. I thought it was an obvious ban 6 months, a year ago, but it's just keep getting worse. If you look at the numbers on the One Ring, I actually did the research on this. If you go back like a year, it was in 23% of decks. If you go back 6 months, it was in like 35-40% of decks. If you look today, it's in like 60-61% of decks. So it is increasing very, very, very quickly. So it's just gotta go. I do think there's some chance that they restrict it. I actually think if there is an issue with the Tolkien estate where there actually is some wording in the contract where they can't ban the cards for a certain amount of time, which that would be wild if that was actually in there, which is why I can't believe it. I can't believe Wizards would give up control over their own game to do a Universes Beyond set. So I don't really believe it. But if that is there somehow, one way to potentially skirt that would be to restrict the One Ring. So you can only play one copy in your deck and do some big announcement about how, we don't like restricting cards, but it is the One Ring, so it's a flavor win. So then the card would still technically be legal. The question is, would that actually solve the One Ring problem? And I think the answer is mostly. You do get the downside of restricted cards in general, which is if you look at formats with restricted cards like Vintage, a lot of those decks play all the restricted cards and try to tutor up the restricted cards because they're super busted. So I imagine if you restricted the One Ring, you would have decks that are using Karn the Great Creator to have additional copies and get their One Ring out of the sideboard or whatever. But it does eliminate one of the worst aspects of the One Ring, which is because it's a legend, you just play the first one, draw 3 cards, draw 6 cards, find another one, legend will roll away the first one, reset the burden counters, start the process over. Like the chaining of rings into rings into rings, which keeps you from ever really feeling the full burden of the ring, is one of the things that makes it so broken. And if the One Ring was restricted, at least there would be more of a downside that you could actually die to your own One Ring, which just doesn't really happen much anymore because of the legend rule thing. So at least it would play what I would say in the way more like it would intended. Would it still be too powerful? Perhaps. Like, it would lead to some frustrating games where your opponent just happens to randomly have the ring and draws like 10 cards and wins the game because of it, and you're going to feel really bad knowing it was the only copy in their deck. So maybe it still needs to go, but I do think there's some % chance that Wizards goes that direction rather than just banning it.
It's a very powerful colorless card draw spell. It can go in every deck, and boy, does it go in a lot of decks. Now, if you remember around the time Nadu was legal, there was a lot of conversation about banning the One Ring. And I said, it's possible that you could need to ban the One Ring, but the problem I had with it was that the One Ring decks were very good against Boros energy. It was a pretty common thing where you could just play your rings for a couple turns, go over the top of the Boros energy decks. Now,
but
since
then what
that was the metagame dynamic, Boros energy has just started playing the ring themselves. They do this so that they can beat those control decks that were playing the ring against them, and so that they can just beat the mirror. And they're going to side them out against a lot of the combo decks, but the card quality of Boros is so high that they can just afford to play the card. And I think for me, as soon as this became the metagame dynamic, you remember at the Pro Tour when Nadu was legal, Boros did not play the ring decks, very good against Boros. They've since adopted it. For me, this was the threshold where I felt that the ring needed to be banned.
I think that also illuminates why it's so important to ban something from the energy deck. Like, I've been on Ban the One Ring for like a year now, so I got there way quicker. The point that it was allowing some decks to compete with Boros energy, that is a fair one. But then, as Spike said, energy adopted the One Ring, and because of that history, I don't think you can just ban the One Ring. I think if Wizards just bans the One Ring on the logic that, well, that's going to solve the energy problem because the energy deck plays 4 One Rings, I think that has potential to actually just make the energy problem even worse because the energy deck was one of the best decks in the format before it adopted the One Ring. And I imagine a lot of One Ring decks are going to get super hurt by the loss of the One Ring. If you look at a Tron style, like an Eldrazi style deck, control decks, those get absolutely hurt very, very badly by the loss of the One Ring. Energy, it's like, okay, like, but if no one else has the One Ring, I don't even really need the One Ring, and I'm still the best deck in the format. So I think that Wizards really, really needs to do more than just ban the One Ring. That's not going to solve energy.
And I think we have a clear picture also that the One Ring is just a more powerful card in the modern format than it was before Modern Horizons 3 came out. I don't really see a lot of people talk about this, but I think Ugin's Labyrinth, Flage, both make the One Ring much stronger than it used to be. And the fact that Orcish Bowmaster is just not nearly as common as it used to be have just made ring stocks go way, way up.
True, but I think it was problematic before that as well. Like, for me, the One Ring was problematic almost right from the get-go. Like, it's just too strong of a colorless card. If it was a colored card, maybe it could be okay, but as a colorless card, we've never really seen anything like this before, and I think it was a problem pretty much right from the start. Although it is true that playing in a turn earlier with Ugin's Labyrinth, gaining back some life with Flage, Bowmasters not being as prevalent to punish you for drawing those cards, did make it even better and get us where we are today. But I think the elephant has been in the room for longer than the Modern Horizons 3 cycle.
Ugin's Labyrinth, especially in combination with Talisman, lets you just cast the One Ring on turn 2 pretty dang often. And Flage is just such a perfect, powerful, resilient life gain win condition that you can play in your ring control decks and you can play in your ring mid-range decks energy.
It's funny that we don't see any talk about banning Flage, or at least I have not seen that. Not that I think that's necessarily the right thing to do at this point, but if you just look at play rates of cards in Modern, Flage is, I believe, number 2 to the One Ring, or at least very, very close to that. Yes, a big part of that is the dominance of the energy decks. That is the primary home for Flage. But it is good in other decks as well. So we'll see how it shakes up. I don't think you ban Flage to deal with energy, but it's funny to see Flage go from, I don't even know if it's that good, it seems worse than Kroxa, to being literally one of, if not the most played creature in the entire Modern format. That card's so
and
strong.
Orcish Bowmaster used to be a 4 of in 2 tier 1 decks, Yawgmoth and Rakdos Scam, 2 decks that have since kind of evaporated from the metagame. These things combined,
Yeah, Bowmasters is on the
One Ring
downswing.
is just a really different animal than it used to be.
It's funny to see how fast the power creep happens. That like 2 years ago, Ragavan was the hotness, the card that was dominating the format. So then a year after they print Orcish Bowmasters, which kept Ragavan in check by essentially power creeping it out of the format. And then a year after that, they print other stuff that kind of power creeps Bowmasters out of the format. It's wild. Just, I feel like that's the biggest issue with the Modern Horizon sets. It's not that there's power creep. We want some amount of power creep in the game, but I feel like the Modern Horizon sets pack 5 years or a decade's worth of power creep into a single set. Eventually, Modern probably will get to the point where the One Ring and Bowmasters and Ugin's Labyrinth or whatever, where those cards are naturally going to be fine in it. But I feel like that point was supposed to come in 2035 or something. Very slowly, little by little, over the course of the next decade, as the power of cards slowly increases, we get to that point, rather than just boom, here's a Modern Horizon set, here's a decade's worth of power creep, have at it, we'll do it again in a couple years.
I think to a lesser extent too, when they banned Violent Outburst, kind of the premier Force of Negation decks, Rhinos and Living End started to evaporate a little bit from the metagame, and
That's
so
a good
less
point.
Force of Negations means your non-creature 4-mana spells get better also. So we've talked
I hadn't
about
really thought about
the
that, but
elephant
that's
in the
true.
room. It's time to talk about
The elk
the elk
in the
in the
room.
room. I do think a lot of Modern players aren't really ready to have this conversation, but Gigantha the Wellspring is a very broken card.
I mean, Companion is a very broken mechanic. No one has to convince me about Companions. Honestly, if Wizards did the BNR on Monday and they banned Yamori, Garuda, the literal lowest tier Companions, I'd be like, all right, sure, that's fine. The mechanic is just a mistake in and of itself. We've known this ever since 2020. It took 2 weeks to figure it out. Even with the errata to make you pay mana to put the cards in your hand. Anytime you want to ban a Companion, fine with me.
It is the 3rd most commonly played card in the Modern format, and
Flage
it also got
is
a
number
really
2,
weird and kind
by the way.
of quiet buff in Arena of Glory. Your 8-mana 5/5 has now been errated to be an 8-mana 5/5 with haste, and that is a really, really big deal in the card. Now, of course, Gigantha is not broken in the way that Luris was broken or Yorion was broken. Because those are really powerful card advantage spells that you get for free if you jump through your deck.
Gigantha's just free, right? That's what it comes down to. Yes, it's not as powerful as Yarion or Luris, but it's just so free rolly, which is why it's in so many decks. If you look at the Boros Energy deck, it doesn't want to play any double mana symboled cards. So just accidentally, you can play Gigantha as your
Deck building
companion.
requirement. Gigantha is broken because there is no deck building requirement
yeah.
a lot
Yeah,
of the
exactly.
time. I do a lot of brewing in the Modern format, and every single time I make a new deck, I just do a Gigantha check. Did the deck I build have any double mana symbols? And it's about 20-30% of the time they just don't, and I get a free 5/5.
I remember when they first printed companions. Oh man, I don't know if I can dig up the tweet, but there were definitely WotC people during the peak of companion anger and angst when it was literally just destroying every format in Magic. They were like, is it really worth it to lose a sideboard slot? I don't know. Like, is this free 5/5? I'd have to think about it. Like, is having this free 5/5 giving me 8 cards in hand? Can I really afford to give up a sideboard slot for that? It was the most just like ridiculous. The most ridiculous. Yes, of course. Yes, you're going to give up your friggin' sideboard slot for a free 5/5. Yes, of course. Every time. Don't even think about it. You're just going to do it.
I think that this pill is pretty easy to swallow, that companions are pretty broken. Giving players an extra card is very silly. It breaks the game in a big way. Luris and Yorion were really, really awful. Now, and a lot of times when I have this conversation, people say, oh, okay, let's just ban all companions. And I think that this is kind of missing the point. At the very least, the ones that are still legal besides Gigantha, Lutri, Umori, Gyruda, Zerda, they're just kind of unplayable, and they do have pretty strict deck building restrictions, and I wouldn't ban them. I would ban Gigantha. Gigantha is broken because it does not really have a deck building restriction. Decks like Boros Energy, Domain Zoo, etc. just get to play the card for free. It should go.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. It is true that Umori, Zerda, that level of companion isn't causing any problems currently. I still just think the mechanic is such a mistake that if I could just erase companion from Magic completely, I would do it, because I just think the mechanic itself is a mistake.
It is very, very bad to win the game with a Gigantha or lose the game to Gigantha, which I have done probably over 100 times at this point since the card has been legal. It is time for the card to go, in my opinion. I usually get a lot of pushback when I say this, but I feel very confidently that it is time for the Elk to retire.
100% on board with that. No pushback here. Banning Gigantha sounds good to me.
So with these things in mind, I think that Wizards of the Coast, this is Wizards of the Coast here, have two paths that they could take. Path 1, you could ban Gigantha. Path 1, ban One Ring and Gigantha. Obviously, banning Gigantha is not as important as banning the One Ring, but I think both should go. In my mind, these are
no energy cards
really improve like gameplay and overall quality if they left the format. Now, Wizards could do this, and they could also say, we are also getting rid of all scheduled ban and restricted announcements going forward. We think that this has been not a good way to manage the format, and going forward, we are going to be keeping a close eye on Boros Energy. We're going to be monitoring the deck closely, and there's a chance that we will ban something from that deck in the coming weeks.
As I mentioned before, my concern with that is Wizards actually following through on it. That would be my big concern there. Just like I said earlier, like we've had times when we didn't have a strict BNR schedule, and Wizards still took way too long to ban things. So I feel like we need more than just the announcement that that's what they intend to do. We need someone who's actually going to ban energy if it's still problematic 2 or 3 weeks after this BNR, and I'm just not seeing it. I think that announcement, until I see it actually happening in practice, it wouldn't mean much to me, because you can say anything, but it's actions that speak louder than words, as they say.
I also think it would be a really good idea to unban some cool, classic, iconic cards too. Now,
there's like so many cards in the world of Modern Horizons 3, or Modern Horizons in general, and Fire Design, the War of the Spark Forward stuff. There are probably 10 cards that could come off the ban list, and there's at least like 5 or 6 cards that it's kind of just a joke. Like the idea that Splinter Twin, based on any reasonable take on power level, needs to be banned in Modern is straight up absurd. Like, there is just absolutely no way in the world of the One Rings, in the world that we live in now. I mean, the biggest thing is how much removal there is. Remember when Splinter Twin dominated? That was pre-Fatal Push Modern. Now there's Fatal Push, Leyline Binding, Unholy Heat, Galvanic Discharge. The list of instant speed removal spells that just straight up kill a Splinter Twin, super large. When before it was like you gotta kill it for 2 mana. This was back in when like Jund was playing like Putrefy, like 3 mana removal spells. Like that was when Splinter Twin was dominating, and it was really good back then when you had to spend 2 or 3 mana to kill it. But now in a world where almost everyone is gonna have 1 mana interaction, and in a world where the best combos are winning on turn 3, Splinter Twin's straight up a joke. Like Splinter Twin, I don't even think Splinter Twin would be playable. Like maybe like some fringe tier 3 meme deck, but the idea that Splinter Twin would be too good for Modern is absolutely straight up hilarious at this point. There's no way in the current world, in the current card pool, that Splinter Twin would be that good. And I think the same is true of a pretty big list of
now
other
you
cards.
don't have to unban these 3 cards specifically, or even 3 cards in general, but I would like to see Splinter Twin, Umezawa's Jitte, and Birthing Pod unbanned. I think that all 3 of these cards are very exciting. I think that all of these cards speak to different style of players, creature combo players who really like creature combat, and like combo control players. I also think all 3 of these cards would be fringe playable at best, which I know might be a dynamic and polarizing thing to say.
Nope.
I
Totally
feel very
right.
confidently in this.
Totally agree. Also worth mentioning, it would be a nice shout out to long-term Modern players. Like players like me who are struggling with their relationship with the format that they used to love because of all the upheaval caused by Modern Horizons sets in specific and new card sets in general. Throwing some of these nostalgic blasts from the past, like good in 2015 Modern cards back in the format, it seems like such an easy win. Like, as Spike says, and I totally agree with, the cards aren't going to be too good for Modern. It's hilarious to think that they would be in the current card pool. So they're not going to be too good for Modern, and it's just a nice little something for players that are pining for those old days. It would be exciting to be like, you know what, I remember Birthing Pod. That used to be a cool deck. I'm going to try to build a Birthing Pod deck. Am I going to get crushed by all the power creep? Yeah. Is my deck going to suck? Probably. But it's just kind of cool and nostalgic. So I think that's another upside of unbanning those cards, is scoring some points with long-term Modern players who are maybe a little bit disenfranchised with this new take on Modern Horizons 3 block constructed
Splinter
Modern.
Twin is a card that not only is there so much insane premium interaction for it that was not legal when Splinter Twin was around in the format. Fatal Push, Solitude, Beseiju, Force of Vigor, Force of Negation.
We went through a big list, and I think Fatal Push was the only card we hit on. So yes, also all those cards that Spike said, on top of Leyline Bindings, Galvanic Discharge, Unholy Edict, etc., etc.
This really goes on and on and on. Not only is that the case, the format has just gotten a lot faster and more efficient in general, and I think Splinter Twin would be just a relatively clunky combo in the Modern format in 2024. Umezawa's Jitte does one thing really well in a format that does not care about that thing. Umezawa's Jitte is a card that makes creature combat really one-sided, but I also think that the format has gotten much more powerful, much more efficient, and Umezawa's Jitte would not see any play in Boros Energy. This is an argument that I get a lot. Wouldn't Umezawa's Jitte make energy better? I think no. I think it would be suboptimal to play any number of Umezawa's Jitte over any number of Goblin Bombardment and Boros Energy. I think that Jitte would be a one-of in Stoneforge Mystic Brews. And I think making Stoneforge Mystic Brews better is fun and exciting.
Stoneforge is good, clean, fair Magic by 2024 standards. Like, if my opponent is going to go turn 2 Stoneforge, tutor up Umezawa's Jitte, I'm going to be like, yes, let's do this. This is going to be an actual game of Magic. And even then, I imagine in a lot of matchups, it would still be like Cauldra Complete or something over the Jitte. So yeah, it seems like an easy inclusion.
I think that those are decks that people really gravitate to and they like. I think it's good for those decks to kind of feel kind of classic and iconic. You get to get Jitte, get to get Cauldra. I think it's just kind of cool.
And it's like a fair play pattern, right? Like, we were just talking about how the meta right now, or Spike was just talking about how it's Boros Energy versus a bunch of unfair decks. Powering up a fair deck like Stoneblade seems like a win for everyone.
I'll also say that these kinds of cards, like Jitte, when they've kind of had poor play patterns in the past, I think Twin is another example of this. Poor play patterns in the past, people are worried about unbanning them for fun reasons. I think you could have made the same argument, though, for Bloodbraid Elf, for Jace the Mind Sculptor, for Stoneforge Mystic itself, for Ancestral Visions, for Bitter Blossom. But
being scared of something that was good 20 years ago is absurd to me. Like, Magic is so different now. The power level is so much higher now that how strong or annoying or how bad the play pattern of something like Jide was in 2004 means literally nothing in the context of 2024 Modern. Like, nothing at all.
But in my opinion, when cards get kind of power leveled out of the format, like Twin, Jite, and Pod, then they become fun.
Yeah.
Like, cards that are not powerful enough to dominate a format do not create unpleasant play patterns, in my opinion. And
Yep.
I think Birthing Pod would be a suboptimal way to build the Yawgmoth.
I mean, a really easy, good example of that is Siege Rhino, which Siege Rhino, back during its time in Standard, was kind of a hated card. Like, people were kind of miserable. There's always a Siege Rhino coming down, draining me for 3. It was, like, too good, and people really disliked it and getting burnt out by it and its big body. So it was actually kind of disliked pretty heavily during Standard. And now it is a very iconic, nostalgic card that people love. If I do a Siege Rhino deck somewhere and get crushed with it because it's not that good anymore, but people love it because it's just like this iconic old card. So time heals a lot of wounds with stuff like that, especially time multiplied by power creep. Makes people's perception of cards change a lot. So I do not really have any concerns about play patterns or feel bads with these
Deck,
unbannings.
which would be the best deck for Birthing Pod in general. I think Birthing Pod is worse than Birthing Ritual. I think that it is a very life-intensive card. Gets hit by Artifact Hate. I actually play tested both Twin and Pod against Caleb D like 2 or 3 years ago at this point, and the card performed quite poorly. I think Pod is another one of these cool, classic, iconic cards that would be safe to unban, but also I think when you unban cards, you should do so with a purpose. And for me, the purpose of unbanning these cards would to be get people excited about the format. These are cards that people love. People would be excited to try them out and play. I think it would be a good way to get some life and excitement back into Modern.
I mean, if they started unbanning these iconic nostalgic old cards, that would make me play Modern. I mean, we'd have to see how the format was. If it was still not fun, maybe I wouldn't keep playing it forever. But if they unban Pod and Jide and Splend, you can bet there's going to be some videos on the channel of us trying out those cards just because they're super cool, nostalgic old cards.
Okay, so that's path one Wizards could take. Ban the One Ring, ban Gigantha, get rid of the scheduled BNRs, unban some cool iconic cards. I feel like this would be what I would like to see happen, and this is what I would do if I was in charge. Now, I do think that there is another path.
So again, just the only thing I'd say about that, yes, I think I would agree with that, but only if Wizards actually really truly is going to live up to their off-schedule banning things, the important announcement part. If they are actually really going to be willing to ban energy 3 weeks after this update, the first of the year, if it's still a problem, yes, that's a really good plan. We'll get a lot of hype about these nostalgic unbannings. You get rid of the One Ring that's got to go. You get rid of a companion, always going to be a positive. And then if energy is still a problem, which I believe it would very much still be a problem, what do we lose? 3 weeks over the holidays when people are going to be doing other stuff anyway, and then we ban it. I just don't have that faith. It all hinges on Wizards living up to that announcement and not just paying lip service to the idea that if things get really bad, we could do it. I just have this huge fear if they go down this first path that what's actually going to happen is it's going to be February or March and energy is still going to be 30-40% of the meta. It's going to be dominating. No one's going to want to play Modern, and it's not going to get banned until after Aether Drift or something anyway, even though Wizards technically would have the power to ban it off schedule. I don't have faith they'd use that power.
If the CEO of Wizards of the Coast or some executive or even the play design team themselves have just decided to keep these scheduled BNRs, if they are just here to stay and they're not willing to change them, you do have to take different action here. You need to ban the One Ring. You need to ban Gigantha. I think this is something you should do no matter what. But you also need to ban something from Boros Energy. It is just too risky to have a 3-month Nadu period. Format is unplayable. 3 month of Boros versus combo. Format is very bad. Into is the format still just going to be Boros versus combo decks? It definitely could be, which is why getting rid of the scheduled BNR lets you keep an eye on it. But 3 more months, I don't know if I can do it.
That is part of how I judge the health of Modern. If Spike's not playing Modern, you know Modern's in a bad place. And if you go to Spike's Twitch, you'll see a lot of Standard lately, which is they always talk about voting with your wallet. For a content creator, you vote with what formats you're actually playing for your content. And when you see someone like Spike, who is all in on Modern and loves Modern, playing not Modern but Standard consistently, you know that's a very, very bad sign. And I think that's a really good point about the energy decks and the risk of it. The funny thing is, we already did this, right? Like, what Spike is talking about here, this already happened. The risk of not banning energy back in August when they banned Nadu was this 3-month dead period, which is a risk that we talked about before the bannings. Like, the possibility of energy being too good and doing literally exactly what ended up playing out. I thought that was a risk and talked about that before they banned Nadu, that they probably should ban something from energy too, because there's a risk that's going to be the new Nadu. That's exactly what happened. So we've already seen this play out, and the more times this happens, the worse Modern gets and the less people want to play Modern. Like I said, I'm one of these people that stuck it out through Modern Horizons 1, through Modern Horizons 2, like through this pattern of like this happening kind of on repeat in my perception, going from the scam decks to the Nadu decks to the energy decks to the Hog Act. We just keep going through this cycle. I stuck it out for a long time, and eventually it just wore me down little by little, 3-month period by 3-month period of a dominant deck with it being impossible to brew until the next banning happened, and then seeing it happen again. So yeah, we've already seen this happening. So if Wizards is not only going to announce the end to scheduled BNRs for Modern, but actively manage the format and really live up to that announcement, they got to ban more aggressively. Like, the risk is higher of letting Modern keep going through these 3-month lame duck periods than it is of over banning. Like, you're killing Modern quicker by banning too little than banning too much at this point, because the banning too little is what's driving people like me, and apparently even like Spike to some extent, away from playing Modern for some periods of time. So I think the risk is actually way higher of doing too little than doing too much with this BNR.
So if you were going to ban something from Boros, I think you could kind of just pick any 2 cards from a Johnny, Static Prison, Flage, Amtraptor, and Guide of Souls. I wouldn't pick Ocelot Pride. I think these 5 cards are about the same in power level. I think you can make a really good argument for any 2 of them.
I think the interesting question, and I mostly agree with that, I think for me, it'd be like Guide of Souls, Amtraptor, number 1 and number 2, and then maybe I could also see Galvanic Discharge on the list. We see Static Prison on there. I think the question is, do we want a Johnny and Flage playable in other decks? I think that's the big question. Right now, Energy is the dominant home for those 2 cards. Do we think those cards have redeeming qualities in another context? Like, do we want Flage to be able to be in some control deck or some burn deck? Do we want a Johnny to be played in, I don't know, mono white legends or cats or whatever home we find for it in the future? Some sort of generic Boros aggro style deck. Like, do those cards have enough redeeming qualities that we want them in the format for when Energy is not the tier 0 deck? That would be the one question. So I don't know the answer, because my perception of those cards is so driven by my experience playing against Boros Energy, which makes it feel very negative because I just have negative feelings about that archetype as a whole. So the question is a Johnny and Flage actually a bad card, a problematic card, a card that I don't want in the format? Or do I just feel negatively about them because I've played against the energy deck so much and they're part of the energy deck? So I think for me, I would go headshot of energy itself. I would go Guide of Souls, Amtraptor. I mean, honestly, pick 2, I might pick 3. Like, I'm at that point where I think energy is just, we've seen this before. We saw it with energy in Standard. It's so problematic. And it's proving it again in a whole nother format, 7 years or something after it was first printed, that I think there's not enough redeeming qualities for the archetype of energy that I want it to stick around. So honestly, I might say pick 3 instead of pick 2 and just go like Guide of Souls, Amtraptor, Static Prison, or Galvanic Discharge. Let the other 2 non-energy cards stick around for now and see if they're still annoying and problematic when energy is not a thing. And then if it is, we can ban them in the future and get rid of a Johnny or get rid of Flage. I'm not saying that Johnny and Flage are not powerful. We just haven't really seen them in any context outside of energy at this point. And I kind of wouldn't mind that, I guess, especially if you go, shoot the head to kill the ghoul to get rid of the energy archetype altogether.
Most people want to ban Guide of Souls. I kind of think Amped Raptor would be the first one I'd ban, and then maybe Guide behind it. Maybe my friend Young Dingo, who plays a lot of deck, thinks that Johnny would be the one to go. I think there's a lot of great arguments for Static Prison. It's just like the most efficient removal spell ever. It's just 1 mana, exile anything. I think Flage being so resilient, especially compared with Arena of Glory, has a pretty good argument too. But I would ban 2 of them. I would just be very, very safe. Very much nerf the deck. So, and I would also say that unbanning cards proactively like this is also a lot more difficult if you have these scheduled BNRs. I don't think it would be a mistake to unban any of these, but you just have to play it very, very safe with your unbans if you have scheduled announcements. So
the risk is if you, and it's funny to even say this because I think the odds of this happening are so low, but if you unban Splinter Twin or Birthing Pod, and it turns out that somehow they are actually, this just can't happen, I don't think, in the current card pool with all the power creep. But if it turned out that they were actually the new Nadu, the new Boros Energy or whatever, it's pretty awkward to like unban Splinter Twin, have everyone like buy this Splinter Twin deck that ends up being the best deck in the format, and then like a month later, 3 months later, whatever, banning it again. That would be a very awkward outcome, I guess. Although it feels so safe to me. I can't see it. I can't wrap my mind. When I just think of the modern card pool, I can't wrap my mind around how those cards could actually be a problem.
I probably wouldn't unban anything if I was going to take this route here. So these are the 2 things, the 2 routes that I think would make a lot of sense for Wizards to do. Now, Wizards of the Coast does not always do things that make sense. As Andrea Mengucci once wisely said, Wizards of the Coast mostly does things at random. In fact, I kind of feel very likely that Wizards will not take one of these 2 paths. I think that there's a good chance that something else happens. It's possible that there's some big executive pressure for them to not ban the One Ring because it's such a iconic card. It's possible that they won't want to ban 2 things from Modern Horizons 3 because this is such an anticipated set. I don't think that those arguments make any sense, and I think that they're like weird corporate arguments that I don't like to make them for Wizards. If Wizards is going to do weird corporate things, I'm not going to try to do mental gymnastics to justify it. I'm just going to talk about what I think would make sense to happen. This is what I think would make sense to happen. This is what I hope happens. If Wizards messes it up, I will probably continue playing Standard for a while. Let me know what you think. Obviously, very divisive, very polarizing. People have a lot of opinions on this. I feel like I did the best presenting my arguments as best as I can. We'll see what happens next Monday. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.
So that is AspiringSpikes, Modern Problems, Modern Solutions. And I gotta say, I agree with a lot of this. I think I'm a little bit even more aggressive, I think, than Spike is on wanting bannings. I would like to see Wizards go even further. Like, if they put out a ban announcement on Monday that was like One Ring, Jagatha, which honestly, shout out to Spike for that one, because I hadn't really thought through how much Jagatha would actually be a good ban, but that actually makes a lot of sense to me. So if they announced those, a couple of energy pieces, and then they were like, you know what? We're going to ban Psychic Frog too, because I think that Psychic Frog, based on what we've seen in Modern for the last 6 months and in formats like Legacy, I think that that is going to be a problem post ban announcement. I would be fine with that. We've seen that in the past, right? Where they banned like Reflector Mage in Standard on the theory that it might be too good after other bannings they were making at the time, even if it wasn't too good at present. I would like to see more of that happen. So I think if Wizards is watching this, the worst thing they can do Monday is be too conservative. I think that is the failure. And I have a fear that that's going to happen, because that has happened a lot of times recently where bannings take too long. They ban too few cards when they do ban things. So I think the risk is doing too little, not doing too much. With Modern, after the last 6 months of Nadu and Energy in One Ring, with the current state of the format, I don't think you're going to anger people by doing too much here. I think how you anger people is doing too little, which is what you did last time that led to where we are now with the One Ring of Boros energy dominating. So Wizards, I don't know. Actually, I do have faith, some amount of faith that this is going to be a pretty big ban list announcement. Something that has come up since this video is WotC did a stream, and they didn't really go into in-depth on the bannings, but they talked about how their next stream was going to be about the bannings, and they called it was going to be a doozy of a ban announcement or something. So all the messaging we're getting from Wizards is suggesting that this is going to be a big, impactful, meaningful ban list update. If you want some dark horse predictions, so I agree with Spike. I would love to see them start banning off schedule, although as I said a couple times through this, I don't think that actually just announcing that doesn't do anything. They actually have to live up to that ideal in practice by doing it. So that's a great idea. I think for me, you have to ban the One Ring, although I think there's like a 20% chance that they restrict it instead, which mixed feelings on that, but I think there's a chance that they do that, maybe to appease CEOs or Tolkien's estate. So I think there's some chance that they do that, although just banning it is most likely. I think they will hit multiple things from energy. I think the possibility of an unbanning exists, although track record is less likely to get an unbanning in a huge announcement with a bunch of bannings than it is in a smaller announcement. So if we're getting a big shakeup with a bunch of bannings, I think it's less likely we see a Splinter Twin unban this announcement, Umezawa Jide unban, any of those cards get unbanned. It's more likely, I think, that Wizards does that in an announcement that doesn't have as much going on and the format's in a little bit more stable of a position. So yeah, I'm expecting big changes. My prediction: ban the One Ring with some chance that they restrict the One Ring. Ban at least 2, maybe 3 cards from the energy deck. Jengatha, wouldn't complain. Good idea on that one from Spike. And then if they want to go Psychic Frog or something further down the list, I wouldn't mind that either. So anyway, that is Modern Problems, Modern Solutions. Let me know what you think about this style of video. I think it's kind of cool that it gives us a jumping off point to talk about this stuff. Like, I really respect Spike's opinion. And again, check out his YouTube, check out his Twitch. He's one of my favorite content creators. So definitely check out Spike's stuff if somehow you haven't already. I'm sure most of you already know who Spike is. But I think this is a cool jumping off point where it gives us something that we can talk about, a way to express our opinions on it. So let me know what you think of this style of video, and most importantly, let me know what you think Wizards should do with this ban announcement. What do you want to see happen? What is your relationship to Modern? Are you kind of like me, where you've fallen out of love in the format? I also wonder if we're the boomers here, or I'm the boomer here, where I'm just nostalgic for old Modern, and maybe there's a huge group of people out there that love this Modern Horizons block constructed style of Modern, and I'm just gotta like catch up with the time. So let me know what you think about the format in general in its current state. But anyway, give me your predictions in the comments. Thanks for watching. Check out Spike's stuff. He's pretty awesome, and I will talk to you soon.